Hi, I am Azer. In this podcast series, I share my experiences, learnings, and my professional network with you. The topics discussed here are particularly aimed at supporting people in corporate life and help them navigate their career paths more consciously. Here, you will find special talks around learning, development, talent management, culture, art, and of course, professional coaching. If we are ready, let's get started. This is a very unique moment for me. I have a special guest from Canada, Dr. Julian Humphreys. Coaching since 2013, Julian became a master certified coach with the ICF last year. He has a BS degree in psychology and philosophy from Leeds University, an MA from McGill University, and a PhD from the University of Toronto. So many universities, right? Mm-hmm. He is the founder of the international journal Philosophy of Coaching and have taught at universities in both the US and Canada. And after many years as an independent coach, he currently coaches for INSEAD, renowned business school for the world. And before becoming a full-time coach, he was a musician, communications consultant, tech entrepreneur, and university educator. And I'm very excited to host you. Welcome, Julian.
Thank you very much for having me. It's delightful to be here with you.
So this was the introduction I found from the internet. Mm-hmm. Google is telling me so. So how do you tell your story?
How do I tell my story? Well, it depends how much time you have, I guess. If you want my story, 20 minutes. That's a long time for me to tell my story. I'm not sure people want to spend 20 minutes listening to my story. But if you're asking me how I came to be a coach, I came to be a coach because I struggled to some extent with my own work life, and I wanted to explore that struggle for myself and then work with other people who are struggling in similar ways. I think it's a very difficult thing to manage a career, and firstly to even find a career and then to manage a career successfully. And I think coaching is easily the best support for that endeavor. And the more coaching has grown, the more people have come to find coaching and use coaching to find and manage their careers, the more, I would like to think, the more capable people are at doing that. Although the recent data from Gallup would suggest that there's still massive disengagement at work. And that's a reason to keep coaching, so far as I'm concerned.
We disengage, don't we? Because on paper, it's a bright, shiny career life. However, flip side of the coin is telling the opposite. So failures or ups and downs are real in life. And you are saying coaching helped a lot for you. And what were the milestones for it?
The milestones, well, I don't have some sort of origin story. Like the kind of classic story in coaching is that, somebody was working away in a corporation for 20 years and then they hit a wall and got dispirited and they fell into a depression, and then they found a coach, and the coach, got them out of it, and then they wanted to become a coach and they trained to be a coach, and now they help other people who are in a similar situation. That is not my story. I was, in a way, I guess there's elements of that story. I was working initially in communications and technology, and then transitioned into academia, and quite liked academia, but was more interested in the teaching side of academia than the research side of academia. And then I felt like the teaching was not supported in the way that I wanted to do it in a university setting. The context, the frame for the work that I wanted to do was not supportive enough of students learning, at least in the way that I wanted to do it. And so I'd always wanted to do one-on-one work. And so coaching seemed like a way that I could do the one-on-one work with the sort of intimacy that I like to experience every day. And to do that with a focus and a task orientation. So when a friend of mine who ended up becoming a faculty member at CTI, which was the school that I trained through, started doing coach training and telling me how great it was, I thought, okay, well maybe I'll see what that's all about. And then I came to coaching and I just loved it pretty much from the first workshop and then from the first client. And there's sort of been no looking back for the last 10 years. There is a kind of more psychologically informed way that I do coaching. I have a background in psychology and philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I'm always coming up to the line between coaching and psychotherapy and
Mm-hmm.
not crossing it, but going right up to the line. And now I'm actually doing some training in psychotherapy. So there'll be two very different things, but I am already actually doing some practicum work as a therapist as well.
As an associate certified coach, you are like an introduction and an example for the difference between teacher, therapist, coach, mentor,
Right,
consultant.
right,
We
right.
always make this difference. We have to make this difference to the clients so
Uh-huh.
they have the right service from us. So
Mhm.
it should be challenging for you, right? Or does it become you more agile? Is it a positive thing or negative thing for you?
Well, I think that's why I really do appreciate the ICF and the core competency model, because it's very clear with that model what coaching is and what coaching isn't. And it's also clear that, especially when you get to the master certified coach stage of your coach development, that saying, okay, I'm just going to take my coaching hat off for a minute and speak to you as, a therapist or whatever it may be, it's not really, I don't want to say the way they present it's not acceptable,
Mm-hmm.
but quite apart from whether it's acceptable or not, it's not necessary. There's ways that you can do what you want to do and what's in best service for the client while
Mm-hmm.
staying within the scope of the ICF's core competency model. It just requires some experience and some trust, ultimately, some trust in the process and some trust in your client and some trust in yourself.
I just underlined the last sentence, trust in yourself. And this is time to mention about how we met. So I saw your LinkedIn post about your new journal, and you were ready to chat about everyone in the world. And as soon as I read it, I found the very relevant to my ideas, relevant thoughts about my ideas, actually. In one of the sentences, you are saying this, for example, the very notion of having a wheel while avoiding having a view about having wheels.
That's a quote that I include in that paper
Mm,
from the philosopher Richard Rorty. It's a quote that I absolutely love. I think it's in a way, a very bizarre thing to say, and at the same time, a very profound thing to say. Um, it's part of a larger philosophical outlook that he developed that he called um, postmodern pragmatism.
mm.
And I'm curious what you found interesting about that quote.
So, since coaches should not have a view, so accept that coaches have the solutions to all the questions or answers to their all problems, let's say. So, having a view is a challenge. This was a topic from my last group mentoring session from one of my peers, and he was challenged by this idea. Coaches have this objectivity, not having a view and accept that coachee will find the solution. So this sentence made a relief in my side, actually. So we are human beings, and of course we will have a view, and having that avoidance about having views is like a dance inside, coach. So this might be just a stage. You should have that journey going on your inside. This is how I explain and why I found it useful actually for me.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that we're humans and we can't help but have a view. The question is, what do we do with our view? Do we put all our weight behind it and say, this is my view, I'm right. If you have a different view to me, then you're wrong, or at the very least misguided or mistaken? Or do we say, interesting, so I have this view. You could ask, how is it that I come to hold this view? And there's lots of different ways of answering that, because you could say, I have this view because objective science has led me to have this view. Or you
Mm,
could say, well, I have this view because I grew up in a family of musicians or autocrats or whatever it may be. Or you could say, well, I have this view because it's in my best interest to have this view, and I'm going to promote this view because I'm going to get rich by having this view. There's all sorts of different ways you could answer that question of how you come to have the view that you have.
mm,
What he's arguing is that all our views come to us through a certain history that is both individual, my own personal history, and collective, the history of humanity or the history of, Canadians, let's say, or particular subcultures. And these views are couched in language. To have a view, you have to be able to express a view. And when you express a view, you need the tools of language to express it. And so the more aware you are of the what he calls contingencies, these almost sort of random things that have developed over time that have led you to have the tools that have led you to have the view that you hold, the more careful you're going to be, the more unsure you're going to be, the more doubt you're going to have as to the veracity, the truthfulness of your view or the authority of your view. And so there's a kind of humility that comes out of that. You're genuinely curious about how you came to have the view that you hold, and you're also very curious about other views and how other people came to have the views that they hold. And there's, in a way, no skill more important, I feel,
mm,
today than this, because if you look at the United States and the incredible polarization that you have in that society and in many other societies around the world, it comes from not having this ability to have an appreciation for the various contingencies that have led to you having the view that you have and other people having the view that they have.
The summary of this idea is points of view. It was very deep, and I haven't thought about this deep about views actually. And another thing from your article is about the philosophy of coaching, of course, but from this aspect. So since you mentioned about ICF core competencies, one of the notions which is very famous amongst coaches is this: each individual is the expert in their own life and work, that they are creative, resourceful, and whole. So since the philosophy is rooted in individualism, this is fine. So from the individualist world, it might be easy for coaches to have this or to spread this actually notion to the coaches. However, I am based in Turkey and I am in a collectivist country, and this is a major barrier. And at every step of our coaching, we face this barrier from the people coming from collectivist world. So how do you see this barrier? How can we overcome it? Or what is your perspective about this comparison between individualism and collectivism?
I think it's a great question, and it is a question that has been written about to some extent. The individualistic bias of positive psychology, for instance, which is to
Mm,
say, should we assume when working with a client that their goal is ultimately their own individual happiness? And should we prioritize that and support the development of that goal? Or is there something greater than individual happiness that the individual could or should be focused on? And then it gets a bit funny, right? Because you could say, well, real happiness only comes when you prioritize something other than your own individual happiness. But then, in a way, you're still prioritizing individual happiness. You're just defining it differently. So ultimately, I think people have to decide for themselves. But that's my individualistic bias, because I am saying people do have to decide for themselves. In other words, they have the right and the authority as an individual to decide for themselves what's important to them, what they believe happiness, joy, meaning is about for them.
mm-hmm.
And then a coach is ideally in the business of supporting that for the individual. But it obviously depends to some extent on how the engagement is structured. If an organization is paying for you to coach an individual in the organization, and it's understood that the goal of the coaching is to support the individual in becoming more able to provide value to the organization, then there's inbuilt into that scenario an element of collectivist value, right? It's not just about the individual's growth. It's about the individual's growth and their ability to provide value to the organization. That being said, in most cases, it's only when the individual can connect with their own self-interest in the coaching, which is to say, see how they stand to benefit from growing in the way that the organization wants them to grow, that real growth can happen. It's very difficult to grow and put in the effort required to grow for the sake of somebody else, unless you see that there's enough return on your own investment, your own energy investment. The financial investment that an organization puts into somebody's growth and development is far less than the individual's energy investment that is required for them to grow.
So before hearing this comment, I was thinking this was a barrier. Now, on the contrary, I see people from collectivist cultures can see this as an opportunity. So with having a coaching support, they can see the light, right? What do you
light?
think?
What light do you think they're going to see?
I mean, this is not something that they got used to. So thinking about their own, because they live in a collectivist culture. So most of the time they behave, they act for something else. But coaching, having this individualist philosophy, is giving an opportunity or another perspective for collectivist culture or people living in collectivist culture, and they have automatically have this different perspective.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I don't think that's unique, though, to collectivist cultures. I think there are lots of individuals in individualistic cultures like Canada and the US. Canada's a little more collectivist than the US, I think, who've kind of lost sight of or lost touch with their own subjective self in the situation they find themselves in. And I think one of the most valuable things that a coach or a therapist can do is to inquire and engage in what the individual is feeling and thinking in their situation and where they are in a situation. I'll give you an example. I was working with somebody yesterday. She summarized this book that had been meaningful to her, and she summarized it beautifully. And after saying it was a book that I'd read, after saying that's an amazing summary of the book, I said, but where are you in all this? Because it's very easy to have an abstract conversation about ideas that are out there and not be asked, well, how does it connect to you and your interests and where you are at this particular moment in your life? And that led to a much more interesting conversation, I think, than if we'd just talked about the ideas in an abstract way. And that's in a way the difference between teaching in a university setting and coaching somebody is that in a university setting, you're going to talk about the abstract ideas. You're going to talk about whether they're true or false or valid or, fair or whatever it may be. In an individual coaching session, you're going to say, well, how do these relate to you? What do you want to do with these ideas? How are they meaningful to you as an individual in your situation right now? That's in a very different conversation, a much more intimate conversation, and the kind of conversation that I really value having.
Yeah, definitely. This brought me to my memories I was having during my master in England. So in Turkey, students are very got used to having all the reading list, and if you are good at reading them all, you would pass. However, when I just came across this Western culture, I was thinking about it. I mean, giving the responsibility to the student. I was shocked when I saw that such a short reading list. How will I be ready for the exam, right? I mean, so then I thought that, yeah, this age, I was 23 at that time. And I was thinking I am old enough to decide on my own. So that simple idea changes everything. And automatically brings the responsibility to the person.
Right. It's a great example.
And we really come to the end. It is very famous during coaching sessions. So we are coming towards the end,
Right.
Julian. So if you would send one message during this conversation, what would you tell about?
Well, it sounds very self-serving, but given that some of this conversation has been about that article that I wrote, I say everyone should go read that article. It's free. You can access it for free. So I'm not selling anything here. But I think it's an interesting article. And if you're a coach, particularly, especially if you're a coach who's working within the ICF core competency model, I think there's lots that's interesting there. And I really appreciate how closely you've obviously read that article. And I appreciate the questions that you've asked me about it.
Thank you, Julian. I appreciate your efforts bringing philosophy to coaching. It was my first time and it won't be the last time. Thanks a lot. It was lovely to meet you.
You
And
too.
I can't wait to share this conversation with everyone.